Well, hello, you beautiful people. Welcome back to the Unseen. I am so glad you are with me today. And what we are going to talk about in a couple different ways is how the imagination, what I believe is the imagination, is a prime way you can connect in the spirit realm. So let's talk about it. All right. So there are lots of ways people experience things in the spirit. So this isn't like an all-inclusive talk on like the best or like a list of things, but I actually want to get really specific and kind of an encounter or a practice. I don't really know what else to call it, that I have done many times and I've led other people in doing as well. And I find it really powerful. But before I share the details of that with you, I just want to talk a little bit about the imagination. So, in previous videos, we talk about the imagination a lot. So if you've been following along over the making of the Unseen, we've talked about you've heard about the imagination quite a bit. One of the main things I believe is that like children who have very active imaginations, and really adults do too, we just forget how to use it for good things. But as children, as we grow up, we slowly learn how to devalue it because other people don't value it. Unless you happen to have grown up with someone who really did value that, which is amazing and a beautiful thing. But in our modern way of living, and it's all mostly about like getting things done and very business and just that kind of mindset, the growing up stuff, we forget how to stay connected to our imagination, at least for the positive, which we've also talked about, so I'm not going to go into how we connect to the negative side of imagination very easily, which is like fear and worry. We generally very easily connect to that side, but even as adults, we can learn how to switch our focus and learn to connect in the imagination realm, which I believe the Bible even references as like the eyes of your heart. And so it's like this inward seeing. So it's not just your brain, it has to do with like your mind, your heart, and like the way you see beyond what is seen, so the unseen. I believe when we learn to activate our imagination, we are actually connecting in the spirit realm. Now that doesn't mean everything you imagine is real, but what I believe is that the imagination is even closely connected with how faith works, and that you can actually create things and pull them into reality. But you can even connect in the spirit realm and even create places in the spirit realm that you can go to. So, said a lot of different things there. It might sound a little weird, just stick with me. So that's kind of just the broad idea that I believe the imagination connects to the spirit realm, and you can learn to connect in that way. It's not the only way to connect, but I believe it's a very powerful way we can learn to be engaged with what God has created, as well as to be engaged in your relationship with the Holy Spirit, Jesus, the Father. And I found it to be a very powerful way to be connected with Him and grow in relationship. So one specific, I guess we could call it a tool or a practice. I probably need to think of some good terms with this because I'm not sure what fits best, is what I call the secret garden. Now, that's more of a dramatic name for something very simple. Basic scripture, well, I'll tell you why secret first, and then we'll talk about the garden. I call it secret because everyone's garden is their own, and why gets into where garden comes from. There might be more spots in the Bible that talk about this. Of course, you could go to the Garden of Eden kind of idea, but that's not what this is. So one of my favorite books, which I believe you've probably also heard me talk about, is Song of Solomon or Song of Songs. It's after Psalms, Proverbs, I think Ecclesiastes, and then Song of Solomon. Forgive me if I messed up that order a little bit, but I'm pretty sure it's after Ecclesiastes. It's a book of 8 chapters. It's not very long. If you are not super familiar with it, I would encourage you strongly to dive into that book. It is so powerful, of pretty much the story of the bridegroom and the king, who we know is Jesus, and his kind of wooing of who was they call, the name is Shulamite, but she becomes his like betrothed, and then eventually says yes to marriage, and so then it becomes the bride and the bridegroom, and you really get to see this whole thing play out. And it's really the story of Jesus and his bride, which is the church. And while so you individually are not the bride. So in the sense of the big picture of it, this is getting a little off topic, I'm sorry. It's because the church is the bride. And so every individual, it's like me, myself, I am not the church, but I am a part of the church. So while I am not the bride, I am part of it. So you can connect very closely to what it's talking about. Anyway, so it's this beautiful story, this beautiful revelation on the relationship of the bride and the bridegroom, and his feelings and his thoughts and his pursuit of us, and then our response to him in all the different ways, and like even spots where we've like said no or not yet, so sort of a rejection, and how he responds in that place. It's just beautiful. It's one of my favorite books. I'd say definitely top 3. So read it, and I would say if you're not like really scholarly and you're not good with the language, don't do King James. There's nothing wrong with it, but it puts it in my opinion, very hard to understand terms of what's actually being talked about. Unless you're like really intent to like study into what all the different phrases and things mean, because you'll be reading it and it'll be like, well, this doesn't sound like anything good. Like, what is he actually saying here? So I would encourage you to like find some translations, read it in more than one translation, and find ones that put it in language that's more current for us. Because King James, that was written a long, long time ago now, and it's not so easily understood in our ways anyway. Anyway, just some advice. So in that book, Song of Solomon, you find this stuff about the garden. I'm just going to give you a couple references, but it's in more than one spot. So take these references. I would encourage you to read the whole thing. It's not all about the garden, but it's in there quite a bit. So the first one is this, and this gives a direct connection to what we're talking about, is Song of Solomon, chapter 4, verse 16. And it's her, so this is her, the Shulamite, the bride-to-be who is becoming the bride. She is inviting like the winds to come. Depends on your translation with how it says it, but basically inviting the winds to come and blow on her garden, on the spices of her life, basically. And all of this really speaks of who he is in us, kind of a thing. So anyway, not going to go too deep in that. And so she speaks specifically of her garden and the spices. Now the correlation is then you go to chapter 6, verses 2 and 3, and this is after she has said yes to him, okay? So at first she hasn't said yes. She's interested. They're kind of like, if you want to say they're like courting or dating or something. And now at this point in chapter 6, she said yes, I believe. Pretty sure she said yes at this point, because I think it's in chapter 5 that she says yes. I could be wrong, forgive me. I think it's in chapter 5. Besides the point. So in chapter 6, verse 2 and 3, she says, she's asked by these other people with her, saying, where has your lover gone? Like, where is your beloved gone? And she says, he's gone down into his garden of, in one translation I know it says, his garden of delight. My beloved has gone down to his garden, and he's I don't know, gathering, maybe it says gathering in his bed of spices. So first in chapter 4, it talks about her garden and her spices and all that. And then they ask where'd he go, and she said he's gone into his garden, the spices, because now they're together. Okay. And he's gathering the lilies and all this stuff and feeding his flocks or something. And then it says, I belong to my beloved and he belongs to me. So there's this union. So what is this speaking of? The garden is your inner world. Like, so when we become his spirit lives on the inside of us, and there's this intimacy where we're in him, he's in us. We belong to him, he belongs to us. So it's all intimacy, okay? So garden, though. I discovered in some encounters, and I've had many since then. I don't even remember when the first one happened, but I started having these encounters where like I was connecting in the imagination and like meeting him, okay? And if you don't know that, these are the most powerful types of encounters you can have when you are, and we'll say fruitful encounters, when you are in relationship with him and you are regularly encountering him. Like he's really the point of it all. So everything we're talking about with the unseen, the point is Jesus himself. So I had this encounter, and I just started meeting him in this place where it kind of builds. Like it didn't start off like in this grand sense of seeing and knowing all these things. But I found him in this garden area. And then what ended up happening is he's like walking with me. We're discovering things and like looking at stuff. And I kind of discovered and had this sense, like this knowing. I was like this place is mine. And then I discovered this stuff in Song of Solomon where it talks about the garden, like this is where he goes. He's like feasting and just lots of good stuff anyway. And so I discovered I can actually go there on purpose and meet him there. And so what I found in this connecting in the spirit with your imagination is I believe you can actually create places that you can go back to over and over and over again. And so I've had many encounters in this, what I call the secret garden. And so I'll just share just one story, and this is how we'll wrap it up. I would encourage you to practice this. It's kind of like a meditation, like you just quiet yourself, practice some stillness, and then however you want to imagine it, just begin to activate your imagination and see yourself going into a garden. Real basic. If you have questions, ask me more so I can walk you through this video. We're not really walking you through the practice of it. But if you're interested, let me know. I'll make another video and maybe I'll talk through that. So, where was I? Oh, yeah. So this one encounter I had, I went to the garden, was looking for him, and I found him gardening. He was gardening very gently, like he was just like gently doing the work of a gardener. And where he was, it was like all these pretty flowers and plants and different things going on. And I couldn't tell you what anything's called because I don't know stuff like that. I mean, I know if it's really obvious and I'm seeing apples on a tree, it's an apple tree, but I don't really know like plants. Except for like the common ones like roses or something. Anyway. So he was gardening and it was like he was taking care of everything. And it was this part of the garden that was like really like perfect, like well kept. Like the grass was like perfect. The flowers and plants were perfect. And this is where he was working, okay? And it was just noticeable to me how like well kept it all was. It was just so neat and well kept, and it was beautiful. And I noticed that, but then I also had this thought, and this was weird to me. I was like, that's cool and it looks really good, but, and I'm thinking this to myself, I'm like, but I kind of like the wild look of things. Like pretty flowers and everything's cool, but like I actually like wild, like the wild nature, the growth of it, where it's like not touched, not touched by human hands, and it's just like natural. Like I just have like a draw to that. I love that. And So I was like, that's kind of weird that my garden has this. And then I turned and looked, and there was another spot of the garden, like it was another section, and it was all like full of weeds. But don't go weird there. I'll explain that in a minute. And it was wild, and like it wasn't like perfectly kept and all that. And but it was still really pretty to me. Like I actually really liked it. And I had this thought where I was like, oh, weeds. And so I went to like the normal, natural kind of religious teaching, and thinking that there were weeds in my garden. So thinking of the condition of my heart. And so I just kind of was like, all right, Jesus, I was like, you can have your way completely. Like, let's take care of these weeds. I want it to be all of what you want, kind of a thing. And so that was my reaction to seeing the weeds. And he was so kind through the whole thing. He stopped what he was doing. He came over, we were talking, and he just reminded me, he's like, well, remember, he's like, you like the wild stuff. Like, and I don't know if you've ever been, like me and my family, we like to hike at Stony Creek, and as far as stuff that's around where we live. And, you know, in the summer, there's these like huge weeds, like out in these areas of hiking, like the fields, and they're tall, but they have flowers, because weeds, like some kinds of weeds have these really beautiful flowers on them. And like there's purples and yellows, and it was just like so cool. And so it was stuff like that where he's like, you know, you like the nature wild thing. And he's like, not all weeds are bad. They're just different. He was like, they're okay. So he was like reassuring me that the spot of the garden that had the weeds and like different kinds of flowers, and it just wasn't neat and tidy, but messy. And he was just like, it's okay. He was like, I know you like that. And one, it was just so cool to see, like, he knows you so well. Like, he knew me so well that he had a spot of the garden that he was taking care of. Maybe that was more for himself because he likes it like that. I don't know. But then the other part where it really like spoke to that part of my heart of just like the wild nature of it. And then just his kindness and explaining it all. And he's always so kind. Not that he doesn't show up in other ways too that might be more intense, but he's very, very kind and patient. Yeah, so I've had a number of other ones. Maybe I'll share some on here, but as far as this video, that'll be it. I won't share any more into that. But anyway, the whole point is there's this garden, and I found over the years, because that was a few years ago now, that specific encounter was a couple years ago. And over the years, I've had many of these times where I've intentionally gone to the garden, and it's actually grown, like with different things going on. There's some specific trees that mean some stuff, and I'm not going into it now. Just these places in the garden that have actually like grown over time, or maybe I've become aware of it. But I've had these wonderful times where I've just gotten to like be with Jesus and talk about stuff, and he'll show me things and teach me about stuff. And it's this place that by activating my imagination, I have learned to go and meet him there many times. I'm not going to say all the time because it's not like every day or anything, but a lot of times over the years I've gone to this place. So it's something we can learn to do. You can activate your imagination to actually grow and encounters with him and relationship with him. And I think it is a powerful, powerful thing. I think that's it. I think that's all I'm going to talk about today. Well, thank you for joining me. If you have any questions or you want to know more about something specifically, or you could have a question about something totally different, leave a comment, let me know, and I will talk about more of it or go more in depth with some things. So anyway, bless you. Have a good day, evening, night, whatever time you're watching this.